Having recently examined the labor regimes of the Caribbean, we're going to look more at the broader picture of global empires in the early modern period. Now, I previously mentioned the Qing Empire, which expands from 1636 or 1644 to essentially 1912. The Qing dynasty, officially the Great Qing or Dai Qing, was the last imperial dynasty of China. Established roughly in 1636, and it ruled the entirety of what is so-called China proper, and quite a bit more territory from 1644 to 1912. It was preceded by the Ming dynasty and then succeeded by the Republic of China. The Qing multicultural empire lasted for almost 3 centuries and formed a vast territorial base for modern China. It was the 5th largest empire in world history. The dynasty was founded by Manchu Aisin Yoro, which was a clan from Manchuria, and in the late 16th century, Narachi, originally a Ming Jiaoshu guard, began organizing banners, military social units that included a Manchu, Han, and also Mongol elements. Narachi formed these Manchu clans or banners into a unified entity and officially proclaimed it the later Jin in 1616. By 1636, his son Hong Taiji began driving Ming forces out of the Liaodong Peninsula and declared a new dynasty, the Qing dynasty. Any reading of the Peach Blossom Fan unpacks layers of Chinese culture, art, and history. The play was a popular dramatic form that developed in the 12th century during the Song dynasty. However, the Southern drama declined in the 16th century and it was declared a crude form. As such, the Peach Blossom Fan by Kung Shang Chen may represent one of the last widely successful plays in this genre. The author was a distant descendant of Confucius, supposedly, although he makes points both supporting Confucian and Taoist ideas in his work. He composed the play in 1699, and it's about the decline of the Ming dynasty. It's a representation of different periods of dynastic history in China, but it's really about the decline of the Ming from the perspective of somebody who's living in the Qing dynasty. Now, in this sort of period, it's important to note that Chinese culture actually includes 3 various religious or philosophical perspectives: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Now, Confucianism is really sort of a school of thought, but could be thought of as a religion as well, whereas Taoism and Buddhism are most certainly religions. Combined, these form a new concept called the Sun Chao, or the 3 paths. Sun Chao is really sort of a semi-secular perspective where you have 3 aspects of religious influence mixing together. It's the Sun Chao that is the ruling sort of culture of both Ming China and also Qing China as well. So when we speak about court culture, it's important to understand that the Sun Chao is an influence, a strong influence, the sort of state religion or state religions, if you will, of the Qing Empire. Nonetheless, Muslims, Hui Muslims, and then also Uyghur Muslims retain important positions in the Qing Empire as well. The Mughal Empire, also known as the Mughal Sultanate, was an empire in the Indian subcontinent of South Asia founded in 1526. It was established and ruled by a Muslim dynasty, the Turco-Mongol Chagatai families from Central Asia had immigrated to the area essentially through what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan and into northern India. They had significant Indian, Rajput, and Persian ancestry in the families as well through marriage alliances, and it was only the first two Mughal empires who were fully Central Asian, while successive emperors were predominantly Rajput and Persian ancestry. In fact, Farsi, a Persian language, was the language of the court. The dynasty was essentially Indo-Persian in culture, as illustrated by this tile, which is a photo that I have taken on the left-hand side of the slide from the famous Taj Mahal site. You can see on the tile Persianate style floral patterns and Persian blue. This is an indication of the artistic styles. The Mughal Empire at its peak extended over nearly all of the South Asian subcontinent and parts of Afghanistan, a massive imperial project. It was the second largest empire to have existed in the Indian subcontinent in history, spanning approximately 4 million square kilometers at its zenith, after only the Maurya Empire, which spanned approximately 5 million square kilometers. The Mughal Empire ushered in a period of proto-industrialization or early industrialization, and around the 17th century, Mughal India became the world's largest economic power. To translate this into modern terms, although of course the term GDP was not used before the World War II period, it wasn't measured until the 1940s in the United States, but the estimates are that if you thought about types of what we now call GDP, roughly 25% or 24.4% to be more precise, of the world's economic output came from the Mughal Empire during its zenith. And it was the world leader in manufacturing, producing 25% of what we would call global industrial output up until the 18th century. Now, this is not modern industrialization, but it is still substantial economic production and industrial output in terms of manufacturing bricks and so forth. The Mughal Empire is considered one of three Islamic gunpowder empires, although I will argue a fourth one, the Sokoto Caliphate. Along with the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Persia, this is a substantial gunpowder empire. Of course, you could argue that the Muslim influence in Ming and Qing China and the origins of gunpowder in China suggest that we should think about Ming and Qing China within this broad sweep as well, hence starting with Ming and Qing China. The beginning of the Mughal Empire is conventionally dated to its victory by the founder Babur over Ibrahim Lodi, the first ruler of the Delhi Sultanate, in the First Battle of Panipat in 1526. The classic period of the Mughal Empire starts in 1556 with the ascension of Akbar the Great to the throne. Under the rule of Akbar and his son Jahangir, the region enjoyed much economic progress as well as substantial religious harmony. Jahangir's approach to the court was even a sort of form of early secularism, or sort of proto-secularism, you might say. The monarchs overall were generally interested in local religions and cultural traditions. This is despite contemporary history sort of covering this up, but they actually invested in the building of Buddhist shrines and Buddhist temples, as well as Hindu shrines and Hindu temples to a certain extent, and Jain shrines and Jain temples, and supported Farsi populations and so forth. So it's quite sort of substantial, broad support of religious culture in the subcontinent at the time. Within the context of the broad support of various religious groups within the South Asian subcontinent, it is important to note that the Mughal Empire was an Islamic empire. This photo is from Fatehpur Sikri, which is a very famous heritage site, World Heritage Site, a famous heritage site for India as well. And on the right-hand side of the slide, sticking out in white, you see the tomb of Sheikh Salim Kishti, which is a very important Sufi tomb site as well, a Wali saint site as well, for the veneration of this saint. So it's a very famous, important site. In the back here, you have the Jama Masjid of Fatehpur Sikri. Now, the Mughal empires had essentially a partnership with various Chishti Sufi orders, specifically because of the relationship with Sheikh Salim Chishti and his ability to predict the future. A Sunni Sufi order within the mystic Sunni Sufi tradition of Islam. This particular order began with a small town named Kish, and it's near what we now call Herat in Afghanistan, about around 930 CE. The Kishti order is known for its emphasis on love, tolerance, and openness. Salim Kishti was very famous for predicting the birth of Akbar's son, Jahangir, and the site was the Mughal capital in the 16th century, until they moved to another location. However, it remained very important for their family. Jahangir's son, Shah Jahan, built the Jama Masjid here, pictured in the background, which I highlighted in the 17th century, in honor of his daughter. You might also know Shah Jahan because he is the ruler who commissioned the famous World Heritage Site, the Taj Mahal. The Kishti Sufi order was the first and most prominent among South Asian Sufi orders from the 13th through the 19th centuries, and it remains prominent today thanks to the long-standing impact of the initial patronage of the Mughal Empire. Now, I do want to spend a little bit of time focusing specifically on the religion of the Kishti order. The photos here are photos that I've taken specifically from outside the Wali shrine site. So on the right-hand side, this is looking into the tomb, and on the left-hand side, this is a tomb of another saint. So you can see that there's, out of respect, there's cloths that have been laid on the tomb site. There's flowers that have been laid there. There are strings of yellow and gold that are tied around the tomb site by people who walk around the tomb site and venerate the saint. The Kishtis follow 5 basic devotional practices, also known as zikr. Zikr is spelled with a DH, but it's pronounced as a z. They recite the names of Allah loudly, sitting in a prescribed posture at prescribed times. This is called zikr al-tsari. Reciting the names of Allah silently, zikr iqaf. Reciting the breath, pas-i-al-nafs. Absorption in mystic contemplation. You might think of this as sort of meditation. Mura'aqaba. Then also 40 days or more days of spiritual confinement in a lonely corner or cell for prayer and contemplation. You might think of this as a sort of form of ascetic meditation, also known as sila. Sufi orders trace their origins ultimately to the Islamic prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who is believed to have instructed his successor in mystic teachings and practices in addition to the practices of the Quran, or these practices might be hidden within the lines of the Quran. Opinions differ about this successor. Some Sufi orders trace their lineage to Abu Bakr, while others trace their lineage to Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Abu Bakr is most famous for being the first Sunni caliph, while Ali ibn Abi Talib is Muhammad's cousin, whom the Shia regard as the first Imam. The Kishti, though Sunni, trace their lineage, oddly enough, given this preface, to Ali. This is not unusual for Sufi orders, however, which tend to stress devotion rather than legalism and any interpretations that might lead outside observers to think of sectarianism. This is more about devotion than anything else. Early Kishti sheikhs adopted concepts and doctrines outlined in 2 influential Sufi texts, the Awarif al-Ma'arif of Sheikh Shihab al-Din Shuwarti and the Kasb al-Majub of Hujwiri. These texts are still read and respected today. Kishti also read collections of the sayings, speeches, poems, and letters of the sheikhs. These collections, called Mulfuzat, you can see the term here on the bottom right hand of the slide, Mulfuzat. These collections were prepared by the sheikh's disciples. So if you're thinking about the influence in the court culture, you would find Zikr, Abu Bakr, and Ali as being sort of important figures, and then these Mulfuzat collections being quite influential in the religious practices. When you're thinking about your post, be sure to note anything that you find surprising from the discussion of the Mughal Empire, the Ming and Qing Empire, and the sort of court cultures that are put forward.